A 1985 Honda Goldwing with 412,000 miles on the original engine. Not rebuilt, not bored out. The original engine, still running, still smooth, still crossing state lines every summer weekend. That motorcycle has been on the road longer than most riders have been alive. And the engine inside it was designed in a factory in Kumamoto, Japan, by engineers who treated reliability like a religion. Now compare that to a Harley-Davidson Milwaukee 8 with 30,000 miles and a cam chain tensioner that sounds like a box of gravel, or a Ducati Panigale that needs a 4-figure valve service every 15,000 miles just to keep running the way the factory intended. So why do Japanese motorcycle engines seem to last forever while American and European brands keep getting it wrong? The answer goes deeper than most people think. And it starts with a philosophy that was forged in the rubble of post-war Japan. After the Second World War, Japanese manufacturers did not have the luxury of brand heritage or racing pedigree to sell motorcycles. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki had to compete on one thing above all else. The product had to work. It had to work every single time, for years, without giving the owner a reason to doubt it. That was not a marketing strategy. That was survival. Japanese industry was rebuilding from scratch, and the companies that emerged from that period carried a collective memory of what happens when you cut corners. The engineering culture that came out of that era never went away. It became doctrine. And 3 generations later, it is still the reason a Honda engine built in 2005 will be running without complaint in 2030. Honda is the clearest example. When Soichiro Honda built the company in the late 1940s, he was obsessed with precision. Not performance, not style. Precision. The idea was simple. If every part is machined to the tightest possible tolerance, and every assembly is checked against a standard that leaves no room for variation, then the engine will last as long as the metal allows. The Honda CB750, which rolled out in 1969, was the motorcycle that proved this philosophy to the Western world. It had an inline 4-cylinder engine with an overhead camshaft, an electric starter, and a disc brake on the front wheel. None of those features were new on their own. But the CB750 combined all of them into a package that was affordable, fast, and absurdly reliable. Riders put 100,000 miles on those engines without major work. Mechanics started calling it the bike that changed everything because it raised the baseline for what a production motorcycle should be. And Honda never stopped. The Goldwing Flat 6 engines that came in the following decades became the endurance champions of motorcycling. There are Goldwings from the 1980s and 1990s still touring across North America and Europe, with 200,000, 300,000, sometimes 400,000 miles on the clock. The engines are not exotic. They are not cutting edge. They are just built to a standard that refuses to let them fail early. The manufacturing facility in Kumamoto, Japan, is where Honda builds many of its motorcycle engines today. The tolerances on the cylinder bore, the crankshaft journals, and the valve seats are measured in microns. The casting process for the engine cases uses proprietary techniques that reduce porosity in the aluminum, which means fewer microscopic weak points that could become cracks down the road. Every engine goes through a cold test before it leaves the factory, where sensors verify that compression, oil pressure, and timing are within spec before the engine ever fires for the first time. If you are finding this helpful, hit subscribe. We cover motorcycle engineering and culture every week. Now Yamaha took a slightly different path, but arrived at the same destination. Yamaha has always been willing to push performance harder than Honda, but they build their engines to survive the abuse. The Yamaha FZ and MT series engines are a perfect example. The MT-07 runs a 689cc parallel twin that has become one of the most popular middleweight engines in the world. not because it makes headline-grabbing power numbers, but because it delivers smooth, usable torque for tens of thousands of miles without asking for anything more than regular oil changes and a valve check. At the top end, Yamaha's crossplane crankshaft on the YZF R1 was designed to improve traction and power delivery on the racetrack. But the engineering behind it also distributes mechanical stress more evenly across the crankshaft, which extends the life of the bottom end under hard use. Track day riders beating on R1 engines report them lasting far longer than equivalent European superbikes under the same conditions. The Yamaha Tenere 700, the modern successor to a legendary line of adventure bikes, carries a detuned version of the MT-07 engine that riders are already putting 60,000 and 70,000 hard off-road miles on without touching the top end. Yamaha designs their engines with real-world abuse in mind, not laboratory conditions. And then there is the Yamaha XT600. That single-cylinder thumper has been ridden across the Sahara Desert, through the jungles of Southeast Asia, and along the spine of the Andes Mountains. Adventure riders treat it like a cockroach. You cannot kill it. Change the oil, keep the air filter clean, and the engine will outlast your willingness to keep riding. There are XT600s in Africa with odometers that stopped working at 99,999 kilometers and kept going for years after. Kawasaki and Suzuki built their reputations on the same foundation. The Kawasaki KLR 650, produced from 1987 to 2018, is one of the most traveled motorcycles on Earth. Its single-cylinder engine was designed for simplicity and durability. Above all else, there are KLR engines with 100,000 miles on them in countries where the nearest mechanic is a 2-day ride away. The engine does not care. It just keeps running. Suzuki took a similar approach with the DR650. That air-cooled single has been in production since 1996 with only minor updates, because Suzuki understood that the riders buying it did not want innovation. They wanted a motor that would start every morning in the Mongolian steppe and not leave them stranded. Even at the extreme performance end, Suzuki's Hayabusa engine has proven remarkably durable. The 1,340 cubic centimeters inline-4 produces massive power, and the drag racing community has pushed those engines well beyond factory output with turbo kits and nitrous systems. The fact that the bottom end of a stock Hayabusa can handle that kind of abuse speaks to the quality of the materials and the precision of the assembly. And this is the part where things stopped being funny for American and European manufacturers. Because while Japanese brands were perfecting reliability, the competition was making different choices. Harley-Davidson is the most obvious case. The company built its identity around the air-cooled V-twin, a configuration that produces a distinctive sound, a specific kind of torque delivery, and a thermal management problem that has haunted the brand for decades. Air-cooled engines depend on airflow to shed heat. When a Harley sits in traffic on a hot day in Phoenix or Houston, the engine temperature climbs because there is not enough air moving over the cylinders and heads. Riders feel the heat radiating through the frame and onto their legs. The oil works harder, the tolerances shift as the metal expands, and over time the wear adds up faster than it would in a liquid-cooled engine running at a stable temperature. A liquid-cooled Japanese engine riding through that same traffic in Phoenix is running at a thermostat-controlled temperature regardless of whether the bike is moving at 60 miles per hour or sitting at a red light. The coolant circulates. The radiator fan kicks on. The engine temperature stays in the same narrow band whether it is January or July. That consistency is not a luxury feature. It is the single biggest factor in long-term engine longevity. Harley knew this. They introduced liquid cooling to the touring models with the twin-cooled system, and eventually moved to the Revolution Max engine with full liquid cooling. But for years, the core Softail and Dyna lineup ran air-cooled Milwaukee 8 engines that developed cam chain tensioner wear oil sumping issues, and premature gasket failures at mileages that would be considered barely broken in on a Honda or a Yamaha. The problem was not that Harley engineers were incapable. The problem was that Harley's brand identity demanded a specific engine type, and that engine type came with built-in compromises that no amount of incremental improvement could fully solve. The customer wanted the look, the sound, and the vibration of a traditional Harley V-twin. And the physics of that design fought against the longevity that Japanese engines achieved by making different choices. For a while, things actually seemed fine on the European front. Brands like BMW, Triumph, and Ducati were improving, but the gap in long-term reliability remained. Ducati's Desmodromic valve system is engineering at its most elegant and its most expensive. Instead of using springs to close the valves, Desmo uses a mechanical system that actively opens and closes each valve with separate cams. It allows higher revs with more precision. It also requires valve clearance checks and potential shim adjustments every 15,000 miles, a service that costs between $800 and $2,000 depending on the dealer. A Honda CBR 600RR owner changes the oil, checks the valves at 16,000 miles, and typically finds them still in spec. The shim under bucket design Honda uses is simple and durable, and almost never needs adjustment during the first 50,000 miles. A Ducati Panigale owner at the same mileage is looking at a service bill that could cover 6 months of motorcycle insurance. And if you skip that service, you risk engine damage that makes the bill look trivial by comparison. Triumph has made significant strides with the modern triple-cylinder engines in the Street Triple and Tiger lineup. These engines have earned a good reputation for reliability, but the brand still carries the weight of earlier generations where electrical gremlins and oil leaks were part of the ownership experience. KTM built aggressive, high-performance adventure and sport bikes powered by the LC8 V-twin and single-cylinder engines. Riders love the performance, the throttle response, the chassis dynamics, the aggressive character. These are motorcycles that feel alive in a way that some Japanese bikes do not. But riders are less enthusiastic about the reliability record. Forum threads about KTM engine issues, particularly on the 1290 Super Adventure and older 990 models, fill pages with stories of premature bearing failures, coolant leaks, and electrical faults that Japanese equivalents simply do not generate at the same rate. An adventure rider planning a round-the-world trip does not choose a KTM because it will never break. They choose it because the riding experience is worth the risk. That is a fundamentally different value proposition than what Honda and Yamaha offer. The real question is what happens at the manufacturing level, because that is where the difference compounds. Japanese motorcycle factories run tighter quality control than most of their Western competitors. This is not opinion, it is measurable. The rejection rate for cast engine components at a Honda facility is significantly lower than the industry average, because Honda invested decades in refining the casting process itself, not just inspecting the output. Vertical integration matters too. Honda manufactures a larger percentage of its engine components in-house than most European brands. When you control the foundry that casts the crankcases, the machine shop that bores the cylinders, and the assembly line that builds the final engine, you control every variable. When you outsource those steps to third-party suppliers, you introduce variation that no amount of final inspection can fully catch. This compounds over the life of the engine. A cylinder bore that is 2 microns closer to perfect holds compression better at 80,000 miles. A crankshaft journal that is polished to a finer finish reduces bearing wear over hundreds of thousands of revolutions. A valve seat that is cut with more precision holds its seal longer before needing adjustment. None of these differences matter in the first year of ownership. A brand new Ducati and a brand new Honda will both run flawlessly for the first 10,000 miles. The separation begins at 30,000 miles, becomes obvious at 60,000, and by 100,000 miles, The Japanese engine is still running, while the European engine has likely needed at least one major service intervention. There is also the parts availability factor. Japanese manufacturers produce millions of motorcycles per year. The economies of scale mean replacement parts are affordable and widely stocked at dealers and independent shops around the world. A rider in Thailand, Brazil, or Kenya can walk into a parts shop and find what they need for a Honda CB or a Yamaha FZ. Try finding Ducati Desmo service parts in rural South America. The global infrastructure that supports Japanese motorcycles is itself a form of reliability. So what does this actually mean for someone choosing a motorcycle today? If you ride every day, commute in traffic, tour on weekends, and plan to keep the bike for 5 or 10 years, the total cost of ownership on a Japanese motorcycle is almost always lower. Not just the purchase price, the maintenance costs, the parts availability, the likelihood of a major repair, all of it tilts in favor of the Japanese brands over long ownership periods. That does not mean European and American motorcycles are bad. A Ducati Multistrada is one of the best riding motorcycles ever built. A Harley Road Glide delivers an experience no Japanese tourer replicates. A BMW R1300 GS is an engineering achievement on 2 wheels. But the engines in those machines were not designed with the same ruthless focus on longevity that defines Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki. They were designed to deliver character, brand identity, and a specific riding experience, with durability as an important but secondary consideration. The Japanese approach was different. Build the engine to last first, then figure out how to make it exciting. And that order of priorities is why a 40-year-old Goldwing engine is still crossing the country, while a 5-year-old performance engine from Europe is sitting on a lift, waiting for parts. The motorcycle you buy is always a compromise. Performance, character, reliability, cost. Every brand balances those differently. The Japanese just decided a long time ago which one comes first, and 4 decades of evidence suggests they got the order right. If this video helped you think about your next motorcycle differently, drop a comment and tell me what you are riding now and how many miles are on it. And if you have a Japanese engine with insane mileage, I want to hear about it.